You tease us! Come on!
That's what we do.
You know you've made it when they give you a microphone.
Yeah. Is that the cutoff? Holy smokes!
I've seen that metric used.
Big time. We have 2 microphones. Alright, I'm putting in the notes. Microphone.
Wait, you heard we made it. Put your sunglasses back on.
You're cool now, Mike. All good.
Mike, your job is to not speak. Just look cool.
If you'd like to say something, just whisper it in my ear.
Can we turn these on?
Yes,
Are we?
Yes.
Can everybody hear us okay?
In my head.
How about in the back? Can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Can you hear me when I use a microphone?
You guys want 2 more mics that we use on culture? Yeah, why
No,
not?
we like sharing microphones.
Yeah.
We do actually want those mics. They
actually
want to present themselves.
So, anyway.
They're comedians, I apologize. Down here for a while. What's going on down there?
This was part of our contract, that there'd be a man under the table.
Oh, yes, how do you know? You're that way.
That's fine. Being good.
So I guess no reason to wait for the mics to get started. We are Dorks and Dungeons.
Hi.
This is Brian Paul. Robin Fowler. I'm Brian Kelly. This is Mike Fucara. We have a few other Dorks and Dungeons here in the crowd. Brenton Rees, Sarai, Kramer, Jess Miller, and Kathleen Cavallaro. And Ben Kramer over here. He's not seated, so it's really hard to see him.
My microphone doesn't have a stand.
Would you like us all to hold our mics?
No.
Alright. So, we're Dorks and Dungeons. We're an improv comedy troupe that started by playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons live on stage, and arguably that's what we still do. I'm the Dungeon Master. All these guys are performers in it. Some of them are players, some of them play the Dungeon Master's cast of characters. We'll be performing for you guys tomorrow if you guys want to check it out. We're at 5 p.m. in the main event tent.
Which is over there. The large tent.
I don't know that there are any other tents, but just so you know.
Oh, well, then the tent, but they called it the main event tent, so I thought I'd be specific.
Well, good.
Okay.
It's going well.
So what our show is, essentially, is we take our crew through a live game of Dungeons and Dragons. We have 5 or 6 players. And instead of just a dungeon master describing everything, we have improvisers coming in and playing the cast of characters. It's mostly improvised, actually, and that's what this is about, to make your games at home better through the use of improv. So, how we changed a regular game of Dungeons and Dragons is, other than the obvious, taking actors and have them take the places of the characters in the adventure. Well, I mean, what else did we do? That's pretty much all we did.
Okay, so here's the first thing that we did was that we took most of the rules and we threw them out the window, because here's what's exciting to see on a stage and what's exciting to see in all of the movies and the books that we read is that we don't waste time figuring out how things work. We just go with it and we just run with it. So,
always roll natural 20s.
and you just always roll natural 20s.
It helps if you can do that.
So the big thing we changed was that we took what started out as the 4th edition, whatever the most, that's right?
For D&D 4th
D&D
edition.
Next hasn't come out yet.
No, not yet.
Okay. Yeah, boo. So what we did is we burned most of the book and kept like the first 2 pages where it says roll a die and if you roll high it's good. And we kept frills, there's dwarves, elves, and fighters and wizards and all of that stuff because that's fun and that's flavor. But everything else, we realized in performance was incredibly boring. Not just for us to sit there and wait for someone to look something up, but the audience didn't want to watch that. That's not fun. So we said, then why would we do this even at home? Why would we even take the time at home to sit here and wait, delay the story 10 minutes so that we can figure out how this works? No, that's not fun. Make it up, keep going. So that's the big change. And we're going to go through specific items that we have found that are interesting. But that's the big change.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, yeah, let's go to the next point. This is a game about telling a story. How many of you have played a D&D game where it's you versus the DM or you versus the rules? Or you versus each other? Fun for a little while, right?
No.
Not fun. Not really fun at all. I bet if we asked each of you, your best play sessions were instances of cooperative storytelling with a compelling plot that made you feel interesting and powerful as a character. Am I correct in that?
So that's the important distinction between what might be a board game or a strategy game and a role-playing game. And there's a lot of cross-pollination between the two, and which is fine if that's what you like to play. But that's the important distinction that we made in doing the show, is that we're here to do a role-playing game and tell a story. So the first important lesson that we learned is that we're not here to compete with Brian, who is the game master.
And don't see yourself in competition with the game master. See yourself as in competition with the adventure, sure. Not in the sense of trying to throw it off the rails, but in the sense of feeling like you're overcoming things. But also, you need to not be in competition with your other players. So what we mean by that is... Well, I was hoping...
Oh, were you cueing me? I noticed my keys were on my belt, and I just wanted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
What we mean by not competing with other players is fostering a spirit of cooperation that helps you tell this collective story. I think this might be a good time to talk about the yes and concept.
Okay, so the most basic rule of improv who here has done improv or knows improv? Okay, good.
Oh, wow.
Good. I'm glad that some of you will understand the basics of what I'm talking about. So the basic rule of improv is yes and, which is accept everything that's offered because that's all you've got to work with. As soon as you negate and throw out what someone has said, you just wasted a lot of time for nothing. So yes anding is when you're in a story, accepting everything that's happening. Now, of course, there's dice to come up with uncertain outcomes, things like that, but if I present myself as a certain character, don't negate it. So that's the basic idea of yes and.
A basic tabletop example of that would be like, if I walk into the tavern that we start every adventure in, and I describe my character. You know, you see a half-elf wearing a dark cloak. He has a scar above his right eye. I am putting information out there that really makes it so you want to ask me certain questions, like about that scar above my right eye. If I put that out there and then nothing happens...
Correct. So if I just ignore what he's saying, that's still not yes-anding. So you want to embrace the information people are giving you. Yes-anding isn't just actively negating. You're not just trying to avoid active negation. You're trying to avoid simply ignoring information. So if someone presents information, grab it. That's valuable. You've got something to work with. So pay attention to the details and embrace them.
I think we could take it to failure is fun.
Okay. This is like the biggest, most exciting thing you should try, is that failure is fun. Now, the important lead into this is you're not competing. So obviously if you're competing and you lose, everyone goes, okay, well, let's all go home. Glad we were here for 20 minutes. Thanks for coming out, guys. But if failure's fun, that means that you can accept the fact that, yeah, I'm going to walk into this terrible situation because it's going to be fun for my character to be beaten within an inch of his life.
That's why we play Call of Cthulhu.
Or Call of Cthulhu. Consider the Die Hard film. Bruce Willis fails a lot in that movie. And it's a fantastic film. So accept failure. Accept that sometimes you're going to be in a terrible situation and not always on top of the world. And that's a big part of our show, is that the players constantly come up with bad ideas.
Very, very bad.
Very bad ideas.
Very bad.
Yes.
And at no point, when we screw that up, do we all go, well, I guess that show was 15 minutes. We're not going to do anything else. It's that failure's fun. So when Luke Skywalker like decides to go out on his own and that like ice monster gets him, the Wampa or whatever, right? That was a terrible failure, but that's a great scene. Han Solo comes out looking for him. They have some great one-liners about the thing smelling bad, and that whole thing is awesome. None of that would have happened if we just avoided failure. So go ahead and look at like your favorite movie. There's probably going to be some awesome stuff that happened because the people were willing to take risks. So keep that in mind as a player when you're playing a game. Is this option safe, or is this option fun and I have a risk of failure? You're going to have a really interesting story if you go for the options that are going to be exciting, not safe. Because often playing safe is negating, and then you're off not doing anything. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
I saw a couple of people giving me like confused looks. I think that person's just wearing a mask. No. Sorry.
You could also take this concept, failure is fun, into how many game masters out there? All right, and probably all of you have tried your hand at it at some point or other. You want to present your players with challenging situations. Nobody wants a Monty Hall where some players do like that, but it's not going to be one of your favorite experiences at the end. Allow your players to fail and see how close you can get to killing them without actually killing them. How many people have fun when their character is killed off in most games? What do you do for the rest of the session?
I was a ghost.
You were a ghost.
Make another one.
See?
You erase the name and then you try to come up with a better name. Like
I would like to point out that the ghost option is a brilliant example of failure is fun. Your game master apparently is already fully aware of this idea that failure is fun. You wouldn't have gotten to play a ghost if you hadn't taken that risk and died. So don't be afraid of that.
Right. And there are ways around failure as a game master. If you arrange your adventure in such a way that you don't allow for failure of your players, and then when somebody finally fails, you have nowhere to go from that, then that's a bad adventure outline. That's a bad campaign setting. You want to account that anything could go either way, and have a universe where you can make changes on the fly, get things back on track when things go, when there's failure, without absolutely negating it. Does that make sense? All right. Highbrow stuff we're doing here.
Yeah.
Really high.
We didn't mean to shoot right to highbrow because our show is really lowbrow.
No.
So,
We had 3 characters killed in an avalanche of sex toys last show.
Way to go!
That happened. All right, I think our next talking point is going to be specifically for, which is good for players, but this is also useful for game masters, is about how to play a character in the sense of how do you perform as a character, aside from the numbers on your character sheet. Because most of us are probably not, actors or improvisers. I mean, who here has like a theater degree? All right, so these guys are already in the show. So I don't have a theater degree. It's fine.
You wasted 4 years in college for that?
I did.
So
Now I'm right here.
So
it's my turn to talk. I've got a theater degree, by the way.
Don't worry, we're leading up to you getting to talk.
Sorry. No, it's fine. It's fine. Turn this back off.
So these are the super fast shortcuts to giving yourself something to actually make a character out of. Which is the first one is have a mantra. Does anyone know what a mantra is? It's like a catchphrase. It's like It's like a sentence that summarizes your character, but it's something that they would say. So it's not just a description, but it's a line of dialogue that you'd be notable for, like you killed my father, prepare to die. Looking for the 6-fingered guy. Yes, all of these things are mantras. So when you are creating a character, what can be really useful is think of something this guy or girl probably says a lot, or would say in a movie. Like the punchline at the end of the trailer.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Right. right, we're PG-13.
Melon Farmer.
No, we're not rubbing our one that far. But it seems simple, but it'll always let you get back to your character. So if you're in a scene and you're not sure what to do, go to your mantra and go, all right, this is how this guy would behave. If you've got a mantra, you can kind of like always elaborate from that point forward. So that's like a really useful thing to have sometimes, instead of just being like, well, my elf is an orphan and all of his family was killed by orcs, because that happens to all elves. 90% of D&D characters that are elves have lost their
I've
family to
never
orcs.
played a non-orphan.
Okay, yeah, well, or they're all orphans anyway, but But that doesn't give you a whole lot to go on other than, gosh, I don't like orcs. So come up with a mantra that defines you differently than everyone else, and that will inform your character a lot, because it's a line you can say. You can just say it at the table anytime, literally anytime.
I don't compromise.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's a mantra. So think about that the next time you're writing your character sheet. Is, where they have the backstory section or whatever, write a line of dialogue for your character. That's going to be something that's generic and easy to use. So that's our tip for performing a character. Like, how do you get into character? What's our next point?
Hooks.
Oh, hooks. Yeah. So this is the part about writing all this stuff before you actually play. Mantra is what you use in play. What do you do before you get to the table? Write a story with hooks. And hooks mean things that other people can grab onto to manipulate your character. Being in an ivory tower is not that exciting. You want people to push you around. Have a kryptonite. Have an Aunt May that people are going to threaten in any setting. Those are superhero examples, but put hooks in your backstory, and then you will be part of the story that is being written. If your story is just, I'm an elf and my whole family was killed by orcs and nothing else of interest has ever happened to me and everyone I know is dead, well, gosh, why do you care about anything, and why are you even here? Maybe you should just go to rehab. Let's do a story about fantasy rehab, which is exciting. We'll get to that later.
I think that might be a storyline tomorrow.
Why don't you tell us about the hooks that Jorgen has?
Okay, so the character that I play in the show, his name is Jorgen. He's a dwarven cleric of the sun, and his whole family was killed by terrible monsters in the darkness. Right? So that sounds pretty boring to start. But the hooks that someone's, I think, snoring?
Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate your support. So what I did to make the character have hooks is that he has strong likes and dislikes that actually define how he behaves. So a defining moment in the character history is that he lived underground, he was a dwarf, he came to the surface and he discovered cats for the first time and thought that they were abominations of the darkness and shadow. And so he killed all the cats he found for a week straight before being thrown in prison. And so it's a recurring point in the story that if cats are introduced, it'll get a reaction from him, but also that he was in prison at one point, and he's a wanted criminal at times in the story. So we could go places, and there's hooks. They can say, oh, you were here once, and you killed this old lady's cat. And suddenly, my character knows people, where we're going, what's happening. So that's a hook. That makes it interesting.
It also is very useful for game masters out there, because any hook gives you some sort of leverage, some sort of direction on the way things can go. For example, let's say in a campaign you've just wrapped up your last bit. You guys are in town, everybody's bought all their chainmail or whatever nonsense that people do during downtime. Scale mail. Nobody buys chainmail, they start with it. I can take somebody like Jorgen, and all of a sudden, if I'm out of material, somebody who swore revenge on him for killing their cat may show up. Somebody may be acting behind the scenes against Jorgen because of this reason. Maybe his parents aren't really dead. Maybe it was just so dark.
It's true. He dug upwards to the surface. He doesn't actually know if they're all dead. He assumes.
Feels like cats.
If you have 5 players that all have really great hooks, even if they're a character that even if their play style isn't really conducive to role playing. If they don't like doing that, if they like kicking in the door and fighting monsters, you can still use their character's hooks to make it interesting for everybody else. And by using hooks, you make your players feel special, that something that they invented, something they created, is having repercussions in this world, and you're not a game master that is like, I'm going to tell my story. We're going to start here, and we're going to end here, and these things are going to happen, regardless of where these players came from. You can make it so that it's not just plug in your adventurers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think another point that he brought up is, so a character history, have hooks, but also we don't need a novel. So Jorgen's backstory takes up like 500 words. It fits on like half a sheet of paper. A role-playing game, a tabletop game, is about the story we're telling together right now. So if you're going to write a book, that's an awesome hobby, and I encourage you to do that, but that's not going to help anyone at the table to write a novel. We're not here to read your novel. We're here to play characters. So keep it short, keep it simple. Jorgen's story is Jorgen was a dwarf, and his family was killed by terrible monsters, so he dug to the surface. His first day on the surface, he discovered cats. He didn't know what they were, so he killed them all, and he hates them. That's like half the character story right there. What more do we need? We can make it up on the spot. We don't need to know the name of every brother he has. Or had. They're probably dead. As I said.
Doesn't mean he didn't have them. It just means that it's not something immediately relevant. Our next point is that you as a game master, you as a player, are allowed to invent things on the fly. I don't care if you're playing into Eberron or what are the other ones? Forgotten Realms.
Planescape, Spelljammer, Dark Sun.
All of these things that make
classics.
it that seem like it makes it really easy to have a universe, but actually makes it really hard because it's so much information to absorb. You can make stuff up on the fly. For example, what's a good example from the show?
A good example from the show?
Yeah, when we absolutely invented backstory. We have a character called the Great Mimoso that is a traveling magician. That got his powers from a fairy. He made some sort of fey pact. He, I believe, invented on the fly the story of how he got his powers. That resulted in him accidentally really sawing his wife in half, as opposed to by illusion. Now that came...
Thanks for coming to the panel, guys.
That came out completely organically. But now it's canon. Now it's part of our universe. That was a big risk, and
yeah. So it's exciting to discover this information while you play, rather than having it all written beforehand. Instead, we went, "Gosh, I wonder exactly how that happened. We knew he had a fey pact. Let's do a flashback scene. Let's find out." And we all got to sit there and be entertained by the scene that was happening, rather than him writing out this whole thing and not happening here when we're all hanging out. So that's what's useful about making it up, inventing things on the fly. You don't want to negate what you wrote, but you want to add to it, so that you're yes-anding the information that you already have. We also, another example of inventing things on the fly is in the setting that we play in. There is this magical bar that exists in every town. They're all magically linked, and every time you go into the bar, it's the same bar. So this is why it is the information hub of the entire world. You can always go there to get the rumors that you want. So at one point, someone said, "Well, wait, if every bar in the world is connected to this one, why do we ever travel anywhere? Why don't we walk in the door and walk back out somewhere else?" And we realized that we had essentially written ourselves into a corner that we had to escape from. So on the fly, we just decided to invent our own metaphysics of why this was impossible, which we called the law of conservation of magical gates, in which if you pass through a gate and you don't return through the same one, you will be violating laws of conservation and probably cause the whole pocket dimension to collapse. And you would kill like everyone in a 3-mile area, so people don't do it. It's a bad idea. You want to be a powerful wizard, so you can cancel it out. And I just spit this out in the middle of the show. We all went, "Yep. That's how it works. Great. We can continue moving with this story. No reason to say that that's not true. Just go with it." I wasn't saying anything that canceled out, and there's no dragons anymore. You don't do that, right? Because I'm not negating information. I'm adding to and explaining what's already happened. So that's why inventing on the fly is a really powerful tool.
And as a game master, you really encourage your players to do this. Reward them when they do something like that. Give them in-game benefits if they come up with something really cool. Because this is the type of... You want to be creating a story together. It's not supposed to be 6 people at a table inventing their own separate stories. The most fun... Your fun per hour is going to be much better if you engage in this cooperative storytelling.
All right. So that's our section on tips for players.
And some game masters.
Some game master. Then we have another list of stuff for the game masters. And I think there are a few who are like dedicated game masters, right? All right, this guy over here. This one's for you, buddy.
All right, bring on.
Everyone else is allowed
I
to
have
listen.
to leave to run a game in 5 minutes. So
Okay, well, we better go fast.
Oh, no, okay, all right.
All right, everybody. We got
Your mic is not on.
well.
Okay, so the number one thing...
Before you start, can I ask a question?
Yes,
Yeah.
Please ask a question.
So, a lot of the stuff that you're talking about for hints and stuff, both of us played for a long time, use some of them or come up with them. And the industry has definitely come up with them, and there's a lot of games that try and get people to play in those different styles. So, the fact that you guys do D&D, but don't really do D&D because you run the rest of the book with the 2 pages. I'm just curious, do you use D&D because it's a recognizable name, and that's why you still say you do that, or is it just...
So, officially, the name of the show just no longer includes Dungeons & Dragons, and we don't really flat out advertise that we're doing it, but it's understood that we're playing a fantasy role-playing game. We roll some 20-sided dice. If you want to make the conclusion, that's correct. Like, that's the official byline that we have to say so that Wizards of the Coast doesn't sue us, and I don't know, we don't own anything, so they don't take like my socks or something. But
it is
I have a theater degree.
It is to an extent that it's also recognizable because our audience isn't always. It's actually mostly not people who play role-playing games. Dungeons and Dragons is.
Yeah, it's a keyword.
Most people have played it in high school. They'll recognize a 20-sided die, or they've seen that episode of
They
Freaks and
either
Geeks
played it in high school or beat up
Community.
someone who played it in high school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So part of it is for recognition. There may be better rule sets out there for what we do, but
yeah, I'm a huge fan of indie gaming, and if I'm actually playing at home, I would probably go nowhere near anything Wizards of the Coast actually wrote, because there are more fun things to play.
there are no Wizards of the Coast reps out there, right?
If there are, good job. Their artwork is great. I just don't read the words.
Now you can wow move to it.
Great, we'll get to the list. So the first thing off the list is a reiteration of you are not competing. So your goal isn't to outwit and defeat your players, because if you defeat them and, oh, your character's in prison for the next 20 years and it's inescapable, go home. Right? Like, it should be understood that you're here to entertain them, and they're there to entertain you in the crazy things they're going to do. So it's a two-way street. You're both trying to entertain each other with a story. So it's not a competition. I just want to reiterate that again.
Next one is say yes and to your players. When your players put information out into the world, you have to reward them and one-up them. It's not much to say. Like, let's say a player says, oh, is there a bar in town where I can find this information? I can say, yes. Do you want to go there? But that's not super fun.
Right. So you want to yes and say, yes, there is. And then you add information that makes it interesting. Yes, there is, and it's called the Sloppy Rock. And it's the place where all the orcs go after, eating the flesh of the elves and making more orphans in the world. So you're going there because that's the place to drink. You may not have established that, but you've made it interesting. And that's yes-anding, is making the information interesting.
By the way, your character hates worms.
Next step is just make it up. Now, this will be uncomfortable for a lot of you. Because I know as a DM, I love my books, and I love writing writing things down. I love having notes that I will not need. Like, if you happen to run into this one elf king, this is what he likes to eat for breakfast. I am never going to use that if I write it down. And what works a lot better is if you have a basic idea of where you want it to go, make it up on the spot. You're going to do much better than you think you're going to do. And it's going to, sometimes they won't even know the difference. If you need to take 2 minutes to be like, hang on, I didn't think this place, do it, but trust me, you can do it.
Right. Just making it up, the reason this becomes safe for you is if you're following all the stuff we've said already of yes-anding and keeping it going forward. Failure is fun. Don't use it to put a stone wall in front of your players and go, I guess you're just going to look at this in this room until you find the clue.
Roll to detect door. Roll to detect door.
So that's why you can make it up. You can just keep it moving forward. If they screw up a roll, what am I going to do? Make it up. Make a way to keep going. Because otherwise you're just all sitting around in your basement and you're really bored. Or we're all sitting on a stage and the audience is going, gosh, I wish someone would find that clue. Glad we're all here to see this really interesting story.
It'll also let you get out of situations where your players fail if you're making it up. That's why having a vague idea of where you need to go, like let's say your outline calls for them arriving at this one location. No reason that one location can't be somewhere else if they fail. The less you walk in there with, the more flexible you're going to be.
So that brings us to the next point, which is, for a game master, write scene prompts, don't write scene conclusions. So set up scenarios, interesting collisions of characters, people that will meet up.
Encounters, I believe, would be our word.
Yeah, I guess I don't like using encounter because it has a lot of baggage from what we know of in adventure writing. So I like to call them scene prompts. And if you write a scene prompt and you know the people that will be there, you have some idea of the characters you're going to present to the players, and then just let it play, you can't go wrong. There's no way you're going to go, gosh, they absolutely had to find that one thing on the one guy. You ran away, and they didn't realize they were supposed to chase that one guy and not fight these other. Oh, we're screwed. Gosh, why did I? So write a scene prompt and don't know how it's going to end. So right, because the point is we're playing to find out what happens. If you've already written the end, write it. Go write a book. We're back to if you can write a good story, go write a good story. But role playing is about finding out the story and playing through the story. So write the start. Don't write the end.
It is absolutely not fair to your players if you walk into most of your scenes with a foregone conclusion. If you let your players walk into the king's room and know at the end that you're going to have the king take them away, like have the guards take them away, that's absolutely not fair to your players. That's an informational scene.
Yes, you should just have exposition. Then just tell them the information. But I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard of railroading, and we're kind of bumping into that idea a little bit. And so you don't need to harp on that too much because there's plenty that's been written about that. These are solutions to that problem, which is write a scene prompt, write a series of scene prompts, and in those prompts have links to other scene prompts, but don't have it. You can only get from here to here if this happens. Say, okay, this guy you're going to meet happens to work at this bar. So there's a scene link. I have a scene prompt here. But also, he is the one who screwed over this character previously. So you have a link going off to this scene prompt. So you have scene prompts linking to other things, but the order doesn't matter. You haven't written a necessary conclusion, and people can bounce around from interesting scenario to interesting scenario as they want. And they're going to feel like, yep, this is the way it was supposed to happen. Because it is, because you can't schedule everything.